Welcome. I am Christopher Miller, Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass gave a keynote address at an Independence Day celebration and asked, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" Douglass was a powerful orator and constant agitator for freedom and justice. His speech, given at an event commemorating the signing of the Declaration of Independence, was held at Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. It was a scathing speech in which Douglass stated, "The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn." Douglass' speech highlights the hypocrisy between American ideas of freedom and the reality of freedom. Some may argue that hypocrisy continues today in regarding system-impacted persons. Joining me today are two remarkable champions for freedom and justice. We have Taylor Curtis, who is the Director of Racial Justice and Equity at the YWCA of Greater Cincinnati. She was recognized at the age of 25 as the youngest African-American female to be tenured at an institution of higher learning in the history of the United States. She was a professor of general psychology, social psychology, Black psychology, and Black studies, and the former director of Black studies at her previous institution of higher education. Taylor left the institution of education riddled with structural racism to engage hands-on in the community, working strategically to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And joining us as well is David Singleton. He is the executive director at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. David received his JD from Harvard Law School and his AB in economics and public policy from Duke University. Upon graduating from law school, David received a Skadden Fellowship to work at the Legal Action Center for the Homeless in New York City, where he practiced for 3 years. He then worked as a public defender for 7 years, first with the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem and then the Public Defender Service of the District of Columbia. David is also a professor of law at Northern Kentucky's University Salmon P. Chase College of Law. I want to thank both of you for joining us. And so let's talk. The first question I want us to talk about is the term system impacted. We currently have an exhibit here marking time, the age of mass incarceration, and part of the language that was provided for us as a learning tool is system impacted. I'm going to begin with David. If we can kind of explore the reasons for using that terminology and the significance of that.
First of all, let me say thank you for having both of us. It's a real honor to be here today and to participate on this panel. So system impacted refers to the ways that the criminal legal system is like a cancer. It gets into the lives of human beings, institutions in our community, and it infects and it grows, and it is hard to stop. The impact that human beings experience who have been in our criminal legal system are profound and can be life-changing. We're talking not just about incarcerating someone where they are taken from the community, away from their families, and put in a cage somewhere to spend a period of time away from the community. We're also talking about the impact that happens when they come home and are subjected to laws that restrict the ability to work, to get a professional license, to get housing, to get loans, if you have a criminal record. And it's more than that. It's not just the person who experiences incarceration and deprivation of opportunities, it's their families. And it's also the community as a whole, because I think we suffer when we continue to define human beings by their worst acts, and we shut them out of the opportunity to be contributing members of the community. We all suffer from that. So these impacts are numerous, deep, profound, and that's why I compare it to like a cancer. It's once it gets in your system, it is hard to beat. It's hard to beat.
Thank you. Thank you. Taylor, is there anything you can add, to that terminology, as you see it, the work that you're doing at the YWCA?
Absolutely. I think when we look at the system impacted perspective, when you start to see all of the ways that the system, when we talk about our penal system, has impacted, we also see layers when it comes to every other aspect of systems that have been impacted and are impacting the families that are dealing with having a loved one who is a returning citizen from incarceration or who is incarcerated. When we look at the layers, there's a lot of intersectionality of oppression that we see already playing a vital role in the determinants of health and mental health for individuals. And then when you add in that additional layer of incarceration, it goes to the root. And when you see those many different layers from a socioeconomic standpoint, then being impacted with incarceration, or when you see the experiences of already dealing with racism and the structural racism that has impacted the household, when you talk about communities of color and who's in the household, that's all impacted by racism as a staple system that is of oppression. But then you add in that layer of incarceration, and then you see it manifests differently. The outcomes manifest differently, or even worse, where there are increased outcomes of mental health issues and family vulnerability and trauma behavior and all of the different things that go along with that. And so when we look at it from a community problem standpoint instead of an individual problem standpoint, you start to realize that not only does it play a role in the impacts of those families that are directly tied to someone who's incarcerated or who is a returning citizen, but then it also plays in the community that exists and what's taken away or stripped from the community, or what is added to the community from a negative standpoint, the stigma and the treatment, and how does that play a role when we already have many of these other layers of oppression at play. And so I think having that system impact understanding makes you want to tie in all of the different layers of marginalization that also are taking place. And when you understand that, you then understand more about the whole picture instead of looking at problems, community issues as, siloed. Like a lot of people tend to view incarceration. They see it siloed. They see incarceration as, that's one population of the community. It's over here. It's set apart. They're removed from community. And so that's it. That's their problem. And you get what you get when you're there. And that's not the case at all. It impacts the entire community at a much larger rate.
I like what's being expressed. This impacts us as well, and it impacts the families. Maybe indirectly, but there's this impact. I also like the notion, and I'm going from a historical context. So when we talk about historically, especially with the Underground Railroad, and people will say, well, fugitive slaves, but for us, we say freedom seekers because we don't want to make their action punitive. We want to make sure that you recognize as well as the humanity in those individuals. And I think using this terminology, we want to make sure that we are understanding that these are human beings that are being impacted. They are not subhuman. They are not anyone less than that should not be given their full humanity. They should be given their full humanity. And I think that comes out of the terminology as well.
Yeah, can I just add on to that? Because I think it's such an important point. People are so used to referring to people who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system as inmates or offenders or defendants. And that is really dehumanizing and stigmatizing language that really underscores how we cast off and write off people who have done something to break the law, and we shouldn't be looking at them as less than. They are human beings, just like every single one of us is, on this panel and listening to this panel is a human being who has flaws. And so it is really critical that we get away from the stigmatizing and dehumanizing language which we use to justify what we do, which is to lock people up and lock them up for longer and longer periods of time, and then shut them out of opportunities when they come home.
And that will be a good segue into this next portion of our conversation when they return home. I've been around for quite a bit, especially I learned a great deal from you, David, in you sharing. We had a wonderful program a few years back with retired Judge Fanon Rucker, and having an understanding about the limitations and the barriers for those returning citizens, for those who are system impacted. And this leads into this conversation is they have spent their time, now they are free. But are they really free with these barriers? And Tristan Walker, who is the CEO and founder of the Bevel brand, we received permission from Procter & Gamble to share this wonderful video that we're about to share with all of you here. It's titled Home for Good. And this is an initiative with Tristan Walker. And so we'll show that at this time.
When I came home from prison in 2001, I had a tough time finding a job. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? When you get to that part of the application, your heart starts beating fast, your hands become sweaty. It doesn't matter your education or work experience. That's gonna be the determining factor.
What's up, man?
What's up with you?
Nothing, man.
How you get it, man?
Regular military,
size. I would fill out an application and they tell me that they're not hiring, but they got now hiring signs on the window.
Did that make you go back to doing some of the things that you were doing before?
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they force you to.
Set up. Right?
It's like set up. It's systematically set up for you to have to go back. I was 3 years old when the U.S. Marshals came, beat down the door, and got my dad. Maybe like 5 the second time. I just kept asking my mom, like, yo, where's my dad? Where's he at? He would tell my grandmother, I'm not trying to do that no more. I'm trying to get my life right.
What up, boy? What's up with you, boy? Good to see you. Good to see you, man.
Being a barber changed my dad. Being able to have a community that he can turn to when he needed something, that helped him a lot.
That was a hard moment for me last year.
All those ups and downs that you've been through, to look at you now, I'm so proud of you. I'm happy to call you my dad, man.
What you just said right there is what it was all about. Everything that I've done was for that. Now I can retire. So I can retire now. Old man still got it.
Ooh, now that look good, man.
Wow, that's a powerful video. I definitely want to applaud Procter & Gamble, Tristan Walker, and the Bevel brand for the work they are doing beyond the brand. And so when I first saw that video, I thought about you, David, in that conversation that we were having at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in one of our discovery rooms between you and Fanon. And you talked about all the occupations that those who are system impacted, especially with felons, with a felony, in the myriad of occupations that they cannot pursue. And one of them you were talking about is a barber. I believe, and I think that is still the case. And so I'm looking at that video, and that's the first thing I thought about. Can you talk about that a little bit, about, from a legislative standpoint, what is taking place in the ideas of those barriers?
Well, the barriers are numerous. Usually when I speak to a group, I ask them if they have any idea under Ohio law, how many statutes are on the books, laws are in the books that restrict the ability of people to work if they've got a criminal record. And sometimes people will say, well, 10, 15, 100. Well, the number is over 1,000. It's over 1,000. And one of those restrictions is, now this is not a mandatory that you can't work as a barber, but you could be denied a barber's license if you've got a felony record. There are some mandatory, you cannot work in an industry or field, such as you cannot own your own construction business in a state of Ohio if you have a felony record. You cannot get a license to do that. And so think about that for a moment. You might learn in prison some construction trades, and you can't go out on your own and own a business in that line of work if you've got a felony record. And there's hundreds of restrictions in between those two examples, just so many. And what it does is it puts people in the position of going back to a life that they had hoped to turn the corner on. And it is in none of our interest to make it so difficult for people to work. We should want people to succeed in the workforce, become tax-paying members of the community, remain law-abiding. And when you shut the doors of economic opportunity to people, what do you expect that they're going to do to feed their families? I think we know the answer to that. And that's what's so counterproductive about this punitive approach that is as American as apple pie.
Taylor, I definitely want you to jump in and your thoughts, reflecting back on the video that we just saw and just the reality of those barriers.
This reality is a reality that I've lived as someone who has been in a relationship with and partnered with an individual who has been system impacted, and we have been system impacted, and walking that journey out to where you see the experiences, you see someone with multiple degrees who's got certifications and on a sheet of paper would essentially be an ideal candidate for an opportunity. But because of what comes back on that background check, or even before the background check is even taking place, like you said, just clicking that check to say, yes, I've been convicted at some point in time, that has been a huge barrier in so many different ways. And to watch the defeat of someone who comes in from the day after, grinding out on applications and constantly going for, trying to get interviews and trying to establish themselves again. I've seen it firsthand and witnessed it firsthand and had to pick up the pieces firsthand and had to see the psychological warfare that puts on someone, especially when they're already facing so many other things in society that are against them. And recognizing that all it takes is for that one person to give them a chance. In my experience, I've seen folks go from not having any doors open to being at the top of their career, at the top of their field, extremely successful. But it takes someone recognizing that they're a human being, that they're a person, that they've made a mistake, and that they've paid the restitution for their mistake and leaving it in the past. And unfortunately, that's just not the experience that people have. When I asked this question literally 2 weeks ago to the community in the Montgomery County area in regards to the Montgomery County Jail and what would benefit, what support is necessary to benefit those who are system impacted. The first response from community was stop funding the perpetrators. Call accountability, required a need for holistic support. Where is the access to housing? Where is the behavior modification? Where is the mentorship? Where is the training? Where's the policy changes that provide fair chance at employment? How are we building up leaders? How are we helping folks understand the legislative process and the legal process? What are we doing to provide that support so that you're not someone who is system impacted, who has nowhere to turn and goes back into the same behaviors that got you into the system to start with? All of those things are necessary, but you need to feel like you belong. You have to have that support that says that you are accepted, that you are a part of community, that you are a valued member of society, that you are a human being that has dignity, and that we are willing to walk with you in community. When you look at all the other countries who don't have the same rates, when we talk about recidivism, we talk about that revolving door. When you look at other countries that don't have the same overcrowding in their jails and in their prisons, when you look at folks who have a different outcome and the crime is lowering in those countries, what you see is that they are very much focused on rehabilitation and providing community support to individuals who have broken the law. That restorative justice is something that we don't see here. We don't see it on any level. We don't even see it in the level of our schools. One of the things that we at YWCA do is we have a program called Peaceful Solutions that is developed and designed to disrupt the school to prison pipeline by providing restorative practices and restorative practice training with a level of implicit bias training to all of the staff members at the school. Currently, we're in Northwest school districts. That means that we're training bus drivers, lunch ladies. I mean, everyone who is a part of the school has to go through this training and understand in the schools that we're in that it's necessary to have restorative practices to even be able to develop conflict resolution and recognizing that people are people and that you cannot come in and address someone by doing something to them or for them, but that you must do it with them, and that is the impetus for change. And so we don't have that in our society, not nearly the way that we should. And if we did, we could change some of the impacts that are happening when we talk about system impact.
I think, I definitely want us to unpack restorative practices a little bit further, but I want to go back to this pipeline to prison, that you just mentioned as well, and what measures can be taken so that our young people don't even get into the system, but we understand that sometimes they are brought into the system unbeknownst to anything they have done. And I kind of unpacked that a little bit further. I had a conversation not too long ago, especially with the Roe v. Wade verdict that came out, and they talked about, how people who aspire to pro-life, are they really looking at the life? So, they say that a child, if you have a child, well, you can put that child up for adoption. Then the question was asked, well, do you know how much you have to pay to adopt a child? And I believe the numbers were more than $60,000 to go through the and so what families will have the means to be able, although they might have the resources at home, but to basically pay that amount of money to bring a child, to love them and nurture them. And you just have all these barriers. So we understand if that child doesn't get adopted, that they become a part of the system. And that could be part of that pipeline. You talked about what's going on in schools and the restorative practices there. So can we talk a little bit about what measures can be done to disrupt the pipeline to prison for our young people? I'll let David speak on that, and then Taylor as well.
Well, I think that the biggest thing that we could do to disrupt it is to realize that not everybody has in this country an equal start. I was blown away when I was 21 years old, and I went back to the neighborhood of my birth in the South Bronx, New York. And luckily, I was only there for 6 months and grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, which was a world away. And when I went back that afternoon, that sunny afternoon, when I was 21 years old, back in 1987, believe it or not, I'm old now, I was blown away by what I saw. I'll never forget that day. Broken glass everywhere, shimmering in the sunlight, boarded up buildings, burned out cars. It looked like a stereotype of what you would expect in the South Bronx. And that was the neighborhood of my birth. And what I saw on that block were young brown men, black and brown men, who were about my age, who looked to me like they were hustling just to make it. And I realized at that point how just lucky we are if we don't have that environment. That's not to say that everybody who is young and growing up in grinding poverty is going to fail. Some will make it, but I think it's the heroes who make it out of that. And we can do some very important things in our schools. You heard Taylor talking about some of it that will make a difference at the margins. But until we wrap our arms around the fact that the richest nation in the world has such high poverty, it is just unforgivable. And we've got to lean into that and try and work to make sure that children don't go hungry at night, that they have what they need to succeed, that their parents are making a living wage so that they can be present for their children. That makes a big difference. If mom and dad are not home because they're working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, what do you think happens to the kids? So I think that what I'm talking about is big, it's hard, but we don't address it in this country. We turn the other way when we think about eradicating poverty because we just can't seem to summon the political will to do much of anything these days, let alone something big like anti-poverty work and policy.
Thank you. Taylor, anything you want to add before we talk about legislation and things we can take place?
Absolutely. I mean, as David said, you've got to go back to the root. What is at the root of these life factor issues, these issues in society, these things that are happening that are leading folks to the behaviors or the experiences that might lead to incarceration? When I asked that question to the community, poverty, addiction, abuse, job loss, lack of access to resources, not having the services you need for disabilities, or not having the housing that you need, or having unreal expectations, or trying to find some type of way to get through, like you said, just hustling just to make it. And the labeling that you receive and the negative messages and the things that cause you to be someone other than your best version of yourself, right? All of these things go back to the systemic issues that people are experiencing. And they talked about poverty and addiction and lack of access to resources. When we unpack why our community is experiencing that, we go back to systemic issues. Redlining, that helps explain a lot of the lack of access to the right type of healthcare, the right type of food, the issues with money, socioeconomic status. All those things can be traced back to elements of racism and white supremacy culture that folks live in on a daily basis and have to face on a daily basis. I mean, all of these different messages. Now, that doesn't account for the individual decisions that folks make, but it certainly accounts for what leads you to being desperate for survival. It accounts to what pushes you into the arms of those who are into the wrong things, who are giving you options, opportunities, belonging. Again, that sense of belonging. Almost every person I know who has been a part of a gang at some point in time told me that the reason is because that was their family, right? I mean, we look at all of the things and then look at the disproportionate rates that we're treated when it comes to the upholding of the law, how folks of color are disproportionately arrested, how we're profiled, how we don't have the legal support that's necessary to avoid jail time or avoid incarceration, right? They don't have the literacy to understand some of the things that are transpiring and how that takes place. I mean, there's so many layers to it that goes back to the environment that we're in, and it's a built environment. And when we realize that it is a built environment, then we also realize that we can deconstruct it. And I think that's the key, is recognizing that there are systems of oppression that need to be deconstructed in order for us to see our future change for our younger generations.
So as we were getting, to the close of our conversation, I definitely want us to lean in towards action. We understand that, we need to explore anti-recidivism legislation. We need to explore, measures for continuing education opportunities and job training opportunities, not only for system impacted. That means those young people that might be impacted, even though they haven't been incarcerated, they're being impacted by some type of system, but also for returning citizens. And so for those that are listening to this conversation, can we, what are some measures, what is some action that can be taken so that we can improve the situation for members of our community? Because that's what they are. They are members of our community. They are human beings. They are mothers. They are fathers. They are sons and daughters that are in need of our help. So what can we do? I'll begin with you, Taylor. Yes.
I'll say the first thing that we need to do is put ourselves in that space. I think everybody needs to be able to take a moment to say, it could have been me, right? The moment you realize that you are one decision away from being in the same experience, that is where that humanity and that dignity can start to, click in, tap into your humanity, tap into your dignity. And by doing that, that means that you hold this issue as big of a concern as if it was you, or if it was someone else directly in your family, your child, or someone that you care about. And from that, have that same energy and maintain that momentum in everything that you do, whether it's in your education, whether it's in your advocacy. How do you advocate? There are many different ways. You could be calling your school boards and telling your school boards that you want restorative practices in your school systems, in your school districts, that restorative practices are important to have, and reduce the use of your school resource officers and your police officers and your students' interaction with the police. The next step you could do is also be paying attention to how legislation is operating. What is the legislation doing in your area? Right now, Ohio is in a big push for bail reform. There's a lot of entities that are pushing for bail reform in Ohio because of the impact that cash bail has on folks who are in those marginalized groups, especially, right? Groups of color, low socioeconomic status, right? Find out where the energy and the momentum is in your area, because it exists. And that momentum can be utilized and worked into not only your voting and the voting rights and the voting education, but also how you advocate when it comes to calling your senators, calling your representatives, intentionally telling them what you do and do not stand for, doing the research to know who you're voting for and what they're supporting and how that impacts your community when it comes to these particular issues. Another thing that you could do is take the time to train yourself and train others. When you're in a position where you might be able to influence the hiring manager, influence the hiring practices, influencing policy change in the places that you occupy, influencing how you operate when it comes to providing resources. Perhaps there are specific resources that you might be able to provide to individuals who are system impacted, who need those resources or need access to those resources. There are a lot of resources out there that people don't know about. So how do you go and visit those communities? I'll tell you, I haven't been able to tap into the Cumminsville community much by sending calls and emails, but when I show up to a church service or I show up to a community event, I'm able to connect in and then see what is needed in the community. So I encourage you to be present and to be active and hold that momentum. That it's not a one-off, one time, I saw this video and I said, hey, I want to do something, and I made one call. But be consistently active, because as mentioned before, it is our community that is impacted. You are system impacted. You, whoever you are system impacted as well, because you are a part of the community that is impacted by these issues.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And David?
Well, Taylor said it as well as I possibly could. I'll add just a few thoughts. One thing is, if you are interested in criminal legal system reform, that is something that we do here at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. In addition to providing free legal help to people who are shut out of opportunities because they have a record, we also are in Columbus trying to shape legislation. We were able to get Ban the Box in Ohio to happen for government jobs. That's where the question about whether you've been convicted of a felony or not is no longer on the application for government jobs in Ohio. And if you are found to be suitable for employment, then a background check is done. And then common sense questions are asked about the record to see whether or not it's something that's relevant to what you're going to be doing. And so if you want to learn more about what is currently going on in the legislature, in addition to bail reform, which Taylor mentioned, go to OJPC's website, which is ohiojpc.org, and get in touch with us. And we will plug you in to opportunities to help us legislate to make these problems we've discussed less impactful on people's lives. The other thing I would say is organize, organize, organize. Taylor hit it on the head when she said that if we make our voices heard in sufficient numbers, that's how we can get change to happen. And I don't think we should discount the chance that we can really make a difference. We have seen legislation happen in our state with a very conservative legislature when we have pushed and pushed and pushed. So it is possible to make a difference in Ohio now if we band together in sufficient numbers. One thing I'd like to say to people who are directly impacted and think because they've got a criminal record, specifically a felony record in the state of Ohio, that they cannot vote. That is not true. You can vote in the state of Ohio if you have, if you are no longer incarcerated on your felony conviction. As soon as you are released from prison, or if you never went to prison on your conviction, you can just simply register or re-register to vote and make your voice heard. It matters, and it doesn't just matter in terms of who is running for president or U.S. Representative or U.S. Senator. What really matters is who the local prosecutor is, who the judges are, who your state legislators are. So make your voice heard in that way as well. I know that people get tired of being told to vote, but we cannot surrender our voice at this critical time where we are getting squashed because of these system impacts. We've got to speak up, and one way to do it is through the electoral process.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank both of you for this conversation. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to lend your expertise and your knowledge. Here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, we view ourselves as conveners of these critical conversations that we are having. And so we hope that people are challenged and inspired about what has been expressed. From a historical standpoint, keep in mind that the systems we talk about are systems from the root of enslavement. It's a root of bondage. It's being continued in a different fashion, in a different way. So therefore, we need modern day conductors. We need freedom fighters today. We need justice crusaders today. And so we want all of you to raise your voices, not only through the ballot, but to raise your voices through the work and being a part of the community, understanding that individuals that you may deem as other are a part of our community. They deserve our empathy. They deserve our love. They deserve our efforts to improve and uplift their lives. And so the history, the Underground Railroad, which promotes courage, cooperation, and perseverance, we need to exhibit those principles and those ideas and live up to the ideas of freedom and make them a reality versus this dream from beyond. And so I want to thank my wonderful panel here today, David and Taylor, for joining us. And please tune in if you are watching this and it's not August 7th yet. Please join us at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Marking time, the age of mass incarceration will be in a duration till August 7th. And so please stop by to visit us along with our permanent content. Thank you very much and have a great day.